All right, if everybody could. If everybody could take your seats, we're going to begin with the program. My name is Ed Corrigan. I'm the president of Conservative Partnership Institute. Welcome you to our Off the Record series, which is on the record. It's being live streamed, so for your Q&A and so forth, just be mindful of that. I just wanted to take an opportunity to introduce our host and our guest, our special guest tonight. Our host tonight is Chris Bedford. Chris is the senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent for Blaze Media. His work has been featured in The Telegraph, Compact, and American Mind, and The Washington Examiner, National Review, and The New York Post. Our guest tonight is Jack Posobiec. Jack is the former Navy intelligence officer and has been the leading conservative voice for over a decade. As the host of Human Events Daily on Real America's Voice, he speaks to millions of viewers worldwide. Jack continues to be a regular guest on a host of The Charlie Kirk Show, honoring his friend's legacy while continuing to shape the national conversation. Known for his fearless reporting and news analysis, Jack has also secured high-profile interviews with influential figures like Vice President J.D. Vance, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and Donald Trump Jr. We're thrilled to have both Chris and Jack, two powerful voices in the movement, with us tonight. Enjoy the evening.
I was hiding behind you. I do that sometimes. Can you guys hear us okay? Oh yeah, that's working. Yeah, no, that's the Fed in me. So I appreciate you guys allowing Feds to be here today. The Fediest Fed that ever Feded. And it's great to be here. And it's just incredible. One thing, by the way, that people also don't know about us is that we went through the Claremont Institute together. We were both Lincoln Fellows in the same cohort, which Charlie Kirk did, I guess, 2 years after us. I want to say.
Yeah, he was in the younger class.
Yeah, I want to say was he Publius?
No, he was Lincoln as well.
Oh, he was Lincoln. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he just graduated after we did. We're the old heads.
Yeah, we are the old heads here, but it's really great to be here, and I appreciate this. It's interesting because we had this scheduled a while ago, and I remember throwing it on the calendar, and they said, "Are you going to be free?" I don't even know what day it is. Oh yeah, it's October 9th. And that day in October, I said, "Yeah, I don't have anything going on," and my schedule was wide open a month ago, and then I was doing my show at our Real America's Voice studio here, just down the street, and I got the news about. At first, it was just a rumor that there was a shooting about Charlie, and then everybody knows the rest of the story. And I've only actually I've been in Phoenix for probably about the past 3.5 weeks with Turning Point, working with Turning Point, working with Erica, just being there, being supportive, and political violence has gotten to the point where we've talked about it for many years. I wrote a book about it. I've experienced it. I've covered it. But it's gotten to a point now where it is threatening every single person in this room, the guests included, and even all of you out there. Because if you are a conservative in America today, that means to live your entire life 24/7, top to bottom, when you wake up, when you're going to your car, when you're going to work, when you're coming home, when you're going out, when you're taking your kids to school, you could be killed. And it's blunt, but it's the truth. And I went to the White House yesterday, and I was honored to be a part of this, panel that we held on left-wing domestic violence that's going on in America. And I said the exact same thing, and even said to the president that, Mr. President, the next person who could be assassinated could be sitting at this table right now, and probably is. And so it's gotten to the point in this country, certainly in the wake of Charlie's murder, and only gotten worse. And I think there's a certain profile that's starting to emerge when you look at Gen Z. When you look at the Zoomers, I tend to notice there's sort of it's like there's no middle. So that's great when you're on the right because everyone's like cool and based and awesome. But that means on the left, you turn towards the most extreme possible solutions, which include political assassination. So we've seen who? Luigi Maggioni, right? Thomas Matthew Crooks attempted to kill President Trump. This guy, Tyler Robinson, at Utah Valley University, who I think it's starting to emerge that there's some that he came from a conservative family but was rebelling against that, ran in the other direction, Mormon family. And the ICE shooter down in Dallas as well also fits the same profile. The anti-Catholic shooter in Minneapolis fits the profile. Also, many of these cases, there's a tie to transgenderism and that ideology, which has direct ties with violence and a extremely high rate of violence.
So that
and it's just gotten to the point, and to kind of finish that thought, is it's gotten to the point now where if we do not do something about it, we cannot continue as a movement, as a party, and possibly even as a country.
something that's been strange. Now, we learned more about Robinson since. And you see the mugshot of the guy we're just beginning to learn about who's behind the fires in California, or is accused of being behind the fires. And something that strikes me as a new thing, and something you talked about at the White House yesterday, when all the doctors and nurses and lawyers and other people who were publicly celebrating the death of a young man who left behind 2 children and a wife, is the rise of the normal-looking psychopath, the normal-looking radical, the normal-looking revolutionary leftist. I mean, you used to be able to pick these people out. You know, you'd look at the rallies in front of the Supreme Court. You'd see the people on Antifa. They looked like they were shaken out of the bottom of the can. They were just the last left. I mean, they're ugly people, and they don't do themselves any favors.
Well, and there's a reason they gravitate towards that kind of politics.
Yeah, they're forgotten in some way. There's some, and also I think evil shows itself. Actually, it manifests itself eventually.
It's a brokenness
in physically. But nowadays you see a lot of normal-looking people.
Well, and this
Strange.
is
how it's like sleeper cells throughout the country.
Right, and so like Aaron Burnett went up on CNN last night and said, well, you can't go after Antifa because Antifa is decentralized and, it's not even a real thing. They don't have a head. They don't have a, organization. And certainly there's a number of front,
no Cobra Commander.
Front groups and all the same. But I kind of turned around and I said, oh, so you mean like terrorist cells then, like exactly how terrorist cells have been organized throughout the world, exactly how ISIS operated in the West, by the way, where yes, ISIS had command in the Middle East, but of course they would operate cells largely through internet radicalization, internet outreach, and this is the same thing that we're seeing now. That being said, obviously, and I'm not, I'm speaking not from the perspective of a turning point when I say this, or having any inside knowledge about the investigation, I should say. But when you look at the group of people that Tyler Robinson seemed to be interacting with there in Utah, groups like this Armed Queers of Salt Lake City that seem to have some kind of knowledge that that something would happen to Charlie Kirk that day, it really does make you want to ask the question: was there more out there that was involved in this? And I again, I'm not speaking from any inside knowledge on that. It's my own opinion. It's obviously something that Kash Patel has said that he's looking into, and it clearly seems to be that there was more to that story than meets the eye, and with the idea that people knew about
attempted assassination of the president as well.
Well, certainly.
They just say the world will never know.
Certainly, and the idea that all of this happened by it's a lone wolf and it's just one guy and it's case closed, and I don't buy that, and I haven't met people who buy that. People really tend to think, and that's just not how these operate. So, you take it back to where they'll claim that left-wing violence doesn't exist, or they'll turn around and say, oh well, it's you have to put it in context, and they just shove junk studies in front of you to say that studies where I've seen that where they classify radical Islamic terrorism as right wing because they'll claim that's authoritarian and so therefore that's on the right, and they'll use that. Go look at some of these studies that like Reuters and The Economist and others will post, and you'll see, well, wait a minute, this is clearly not right wing violence. This is radical Islamic terrorism, and I would say that's obviously different from left wing violence as well. It is its own specific thing. And, we used to in this country deal with these things like the 70s, 80s. We had a serial killer problem in America. And how do we deal with that? We dealt with it with the FBI getting together, setting up profilers. There's endless TV shows and movies about this. Silence of the Lambs obviously is about this, which I would also point out includes a transgender killer, Buffalo Bob. Thomas Harris understood this, by the way. So did Alfred Hitchcock when he made Psycho. Again, another cross-dresser who is a murderer. There's clearly something at odds with that denial of reality, and that when reality approaches itself, and when you're confronted with the fact that if you've denied reality so much on such a deep level that you have a break with reality, that does respond with murderous rage. And this is clearly something that was understood for a long time in the horror genre, and that's why there's so many incredible movies that include that. And yet I sit there and I think, gosh, was I the only person who actually followed the plot of these things? Because it's very clear to me what they were trying to say. And it's, look, it's, I'm at a loss for words when I talk about it, sometimes, because of all the emotions that I felt since, since Charlie was killed, and it's, and I'm, he was a good friend of mine, and, it's nothing compared to what the family's gone through, but surprise was not one of them. There's, the shock, obviously, the stunningness, the grief, the anger, of course, is absolutely there. But to say I was surprised, no, because I knew it was only a matter of time before one of us had a shot taken, and I never thought it would be Charlie, I don't think any of us thought that Charlie Kirk would be the one who was killed, but it's something that we've all talked about for a long, long time.
You'd think it'd be someone who was a little easier to hate.
And
like me or whoever else.
And or me, right? And my wife hates when I say that. And, though, I will say, though, I think the reason that Charlie was targeted first was because his own existence was so loathsome to these people.
He exposed them.
He exposed them, but even more than that, the way he lived his life. Here's a white Christian male, which is the approved target of everything the left stands for. And he's he was the high school quarterback of the team. He's married to a beauty queen. He's got 2 beautiful children. He goes around spreading the gospel. He goes around having these debates, and, sure, you could disagree with him. And, gosh, I used to debate him all the time, and on various issues. I'm a Catholic, he's a Protestant, so we would always go to toe on theological issues, and it was great, and it's one of the things I'm going to miss the most. But he did it the right way. He never did it with a fist in anger, and I think that his success and the fact that he was so successful, not only in front of the camera, but also behind the scenes, and I'm sure there's many people in this room who know, and maybe many others who don't, the role that Charlie played in the transition process, which of course the administration's talked about publicly, the role that so many staff, if you go look at the admin right now, you will see I would be surprised to find a staffer that doesn't have some tie to TPUSA, or at least having attended one of the events on their resume. And that's the legacy of Charlie Kirk. So many people in so many key positions, not to mention, by the way, his advocacy for J.D. Vance to become the vice president. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes you can actually just choose the best person for the job.
I was shocked and so happy.
Because we all remember the refrain, it's got to be a woman, it's got to be a person of color, you've got to triangulate and do all this. And, you mentioned Butler. I'll tell a quick story about that. Charlie actually asked me to go to the Butler rally. And, obviously we didn't know what would happen at the Butler rally, and we certainly didn't know what would happen to Charlie, but it was the night before the Butler rally, and he said, Jack, you got to get to Butler, Pennsylvania. You got to get up there. And I'm like, Charlie, I'm going to Milwaukee on Sunday, because remember, it was the same weekend as the convention. Mm-hmm. And so I was flying up to Milwaukee. My whole family is flying up to Milwaukee. And I just told myself, logistically, I don't even know how I can do that. It's not going to work with the flights and all the rest. And what do you want me to go to Butler so much for? And he goes, because I want to get you like 60 seconds with Trump to just talk about how great JD Vance is. And that's Charlie Kirk on a Friday night, right? That he's working, he's plotting, he's scheming, he's trying to figure out how can I make this happen any possible way that I can. He's like, and I got Jack, and I know he's from Pennsylvania, and I know we got Trump, and and it'll work, and obviously, it worked out anyway, but that was Charlie. It was
the libs will say you're a Maryland man now.
Oh yeah. They like to. They have no idea what they're talking about, and they will sit there and talk about Charlie in the front of the camera, but behind the scenes, he was constantly doing stuff like that. And there's so many stories that normally I wouldn't want to share, but just because you don't talk about what goes on behind the scenes, but more people have now. He was instrumental in putting RFK, Bobby Kennedy, and Maha together with MAGA, which clearly is what translated into the winning the suburbs. It's what translated into taking this movement of healthcare, which the whole media has forgotten about this, that healthcare was a left-wing issue. It nominally in American politics, you say, healthcare is the domain of the left. It is controlled by the Democrats. And yet through Bobby Kennedy and through Maha, which Charlie was like 100% a huge believer in, personally too, by the way, biohacking, cold plunges, didn't drink caffeine. That was the deal with the Mint Majesty teas. That's something that just changed the course of history, and Charlie never even talked about it publicly.
We saw Charlie change too, and because to become the man that he was. When he started, he was kind of a libertarian. He was young. A lot of people start in libertarianism. He rejected some of the social issues.
Hey, we all make mistakes when we're kids.
Yeah. It got some excitement. It got some things going. But we saw him change on economics. He was someone who was open to change. Like, he became good friends with Tucker.
Yep.
And that was after Tucker went hard at him on stage at his own event.
I was at that event. Yeah, I remember that.
And then we saw him become
I think
a
that was
Christian.
the truckers where they got into it on that one.
Self-driving
automated truck.
I would ban it immediately.
Ban it immediately.
And then we saw him become a Christian. How much were you friends with him as he made that shift from young libertarian to Christian? When did you meet him in his life, and what light can you shed on it for our audience about that transformation from someone who had ideas about taxes, regulation, defense.
Big Gov sucks, right? That was the original Turning Point slogan.
But became someone who is so much more.
Yeah, no. So I got to know Charlie. I'd say like 2017 was when the first time we met, and we just really met on the trail. Going to do grassroots events together, and doing CPACs, or flew up to Chicago once right after I got married, actually. And we were there with Charlie, and we did this event in the Chicago area. It was like right before Thanksgiving. We were there. It was like freezing cold, and there was Charlie up giving a speech, and I came up after him giving my speech, and we did that and parted ways. And then I'd see him again. Actually,
he opened up for you.
Of course. I was in St. Louis once at a Phyllis Schlafly Eagles Forum, which of course was run by Ed Martin, the great Ed Martin, who's now here in D.C. And although I'm told that Ed Martin is working late tonight because there's an indictment of a certain New York Attorney General that he's working on. You guys may have heard of that. He was, I was trying to get him to come tonight, and he was thinking about it, and he said, Jack, I got to work late. We're doing something tonight. I said, okay, Ed. But I remember Ed comes to me at that event, and he said, Jack, you've got to, because I had a rental car. And he goes, you had a rental car here, right, Jack? I said, yeah. He goes, can you go pick up somebody at the airport for me? I said, who's that? He goes, oh, it's this guy, Charlie Kirk. I said, oh, yeah, Charlie. I'll go pick up Charlie. So just stuff like that, getting to know each other from being at events together. And then, of course, in the first admin, Ubiquitous, he and I would say, were both mainstays over at the Trump Hotel lobby, which was, if you guys think Butterworth's is the place, like and it's great. Don't get me wrong. I love you, Raheem. Please don't kill me. But I was just there yesterday. And but the Trump Hotel lobby was just a scene unto itself. Cabinet members, grassroots supporters, donors, journalists, and the president himself would come in, once or twice a month. And it was just it was a moment in time that you can't ever recapture, lightning in a bottle. And so you asked me about when Charlie made his change, and he's always been Christian, but he never, he wasn't like a public Christian before. Mm-hmm. And I would honestly credit it to Erica. I would credit it to him getting to know Erica and, dating her, which, started very early on. And, let's just say it, Erica, she was more based than Charlie early on. She was just, Charlie was someone who, he had that journey that he was on from sort of the Midwestern libertarian, staple a green card to the back of the diploma. We all remember those comments. And Erica would be the one, no, we're not doing this. And she is an incredibly devout Christian and would tell him, Charlie, you need to talk about your faith more publicly. And he would say, why? The Christian right in the 90s, they went down in flames. They're kind of like a punchline. People don't like it when we get too churchy. And for people who know him now, to where he ended up, that he could, quote the scripture at, give him a chapter and verse, and he could just tell you everything right off the top of his head in eidetic memory. And he would spend so much time studying and reading over and over and over to really get it down. And I would credit it to Erica, who encouraged him to be more public about it. I would also credit it to the fact that he got married, like so many people. He gets married, he starts having children, and then realizes that there's more to life than tax cuts, as it turns out. Really, we still do the tax cuts, don't worry. But realizing that we have to leave a legacy in this world. And look, Charlie left his legacy a lot earlier than any of us thought that he would, but he certainly left a legacy that I think no one's ever going to forget.
I'm going to ask you one more question and then turn it over to the audience because I know we're running a little behind. I'm sorry about that. Erica gave an incredible...
Chris was he was trying to get an image of the Letitia James perp walk. He was like staked out in front of her townhouse, but it didn't work. She pulled a Comey and went out the back.
Erica gave a beautiful eulogy for her husband at the funeral. And in it, one of the very moving things that she said was that she forgives his killer.
Right.
That's a really wonderful, wonderful Christian thing to do. She said she didn't want to have that on her conscience when she answered to God. She wanted to see her husband again. But since the dawn of time, part of the duty of defending civilization has rested on the men and the people who are willing to take it to the enemy and defend their civilization from murderers and barbarians and psychopaths. And that's a burden that we have to bear. It doesn't seem like the left is actually stepping back voluntarily from this violence. They're still cheering it on, even in the media. They're still talking about it. So Antifa is not just going to put down its arms and say, oh my gosh, we've gone too far. How does the government, you've worked in military intelligence, you've been in Antifa, you've been targeted, you've written about this. What are some of the concrete steps that can be done as opposed to just throwing up their hands and to actually dismantle this so it becomes like serial killing became a rare thing now,
right,
and something that's been pushed out of society by proper law enforcement, or like the assassinations and the bombings of the 60s and 70s were? What are some of the steps that can be done to make sure that our children don't have to grow up in a world that is spiraling towards the collapse?
Right, and by the way, I would just add, unfortunately, for my children who knew Charlie, they are already growing up in that world.
Yeah.
And so, I just point that out for people. My children had someone who they considered like an uncle to them. They lived through seeing President Trump be shot last year. They know they call him Mr. Steve Bannon, and they saw him go to jail last year by Joe Biden, and then Trump was shot about a week later. And now they know someone who they personally know someone who was assassinated over politics and is now a martyr. And that's my kids. It's my boys. I've no idea how to explain any of this now. I didn't let them watch the video, obviously. But this is the world they're growing up in right now. And all of our kids, for those of us who are parents, you as well. And it will not stop until it's stopped. Yesterday, for example, Nancy Pelosi, not some, radical on the street in Portland, Nancy Pelosi, as close as they come to, a leader of the Democrat Party, leader emeritus maybe. she was asked about the comments of Jay Jones, who, and a lot of the write-up of those text messages is, it pales in comparison to what he actually said. Not only did he say that a Republican candidate's or Republican opponent's children should be shot, he said that they should be shot and be forced to die in their mother's arms, and that she should watch this before she and her husband were also killed. And he was texting this to a colleague who was a GOP delegate. He then called her and started berating her about this. Nancy Pelosi gets asked about this on CNN yesterday, and she says, well, I still understand he's the best candidate for Attorney General. Nancy Pelosi, the closest you can come to head of the party. So excuse me if I'm not going to sit there when they ask me, oh, Jack, are you going to tone down the rhetoric? Oh, Jack, what about both sides? Is this both sides? Because the bullets are only coming in one direction. The rhetoric, the violence, all of this, it's only coming in one direction. I said to a reporter the other day, I said, where is this violent right? Charlie Kirk was shot and killed, and we responded with prayers. We responded with vigils and candles and rosaries and memorials. If there was ever a time where if this so-called quote-unquote violent right was going to show itself, it would have been in the wake of that. And I said, show me one example. Show me one example of someone on the right being violent in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. There isn't one. So I give you money. Couldn't do it. What can we do? Look, President Trump has come a long way on this. Of course, we were there yesterday. One of the concrete examples that I gave him on this is the foreign terrorist designation for Antifa. The domestic terrorist designation, from a policy perspective, it does some good from the federal government level. However, it's not. There's no federal law against domestic terrorism, believe it or not. There are some state laws, but there's no actual federal designation as this. So it doesn't unlock the powers of the national security state, the national security apparatus, the infrastructure, that I used to use when I was a member of the intelligence community. However, when you look at Antifa's structure, when you look at their links to Europe, which is where Antifa comes from, Antifa was originally formed in Germany, then spread to Spain, of course, Italy, France, the UK. They maintain very strong cells all across Europe. And by the way, for the people who say that, oh, they don't have addresses and they have safe houses, I'm more than happy to provide you to them. And in fact, we have yesterday and today, that roundtable that you saw is sort of becoming a quasi-working group, I suppose you could say, and foreign terrorists, as well as, by the way, training and links to Middle Eastern groups. And no, I don't just mean Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and things like that, but other groups as well in Syria, allows the entire national security infrastructure to be turned against these groups. It allows Secretary Bessent to use the powers of the Treasury Department to go after their money, to go after the financiers, and it allows the Department of Justice to roll up by the way, not just anyone who is funding it, but even allows them to freeze assets of anyone who is involved with funding them. This is huge. So that's number one. Number two, obviously on a direct level, the joint terrorism task forces that exist throughout the country, they've been activated. Look, when it comes to a place like Portland or Chicago that are clearly in open defiance of the federal government, I've argued this on the podcast, and I certainly mentioned it to the White House yesterday. Call in the National Guard. They'll call it invoking the Insurrection Act, and certainly that is what needs to be done when the governor refuses to. But when you have these groups that are clearly operating to obstruct and to kill members of the federal government who are enforcing immigration and customs laws, which is the remit of the federal government. This is the acronym ICE. This is what it literally stands for. There is no state right here that's being abridged. It is very clear this is the purview of the federal government. It's an obvious supremacy clause issue, and so a limited invocation of the Insurrection Act to bring the National Guard in would absolutely be warranted in these instances. And for any of the groups that are involved in organizing this, then you could use the Joint Terrorism Task Force to go after them. Third, and this is actually it's a good DC sort of trivia thing. So people know the RICO Act, right? The Racketeering Act. So the RICO Act, and people say, why don't you use RICO against Antifa? And interestingly enough, this is something I didn't even know until recently, that because RICO was famously enacted against the mafia, RICO requires a list of certain predicate crimes in order to be invoked. Well, as it turns out, because those predicate crimes were designed for mafia, mafioso, mob organizations, Giuliani, of course, used this to smash the 5 families in New York, rioting is not one of those predicate crimes currently. So this is an area where a legislative fix, and I believe Senator Cruz actually has a bill in the Senate about this, and there's some other folks in the House that have talked about it as well. This could be a very quick update that's done to the RICO Act, just to add rioting as one of the predicate crimes to be able to start an entire racketeering investigation into the organization and everything they touch. And sure, and by the way, if the media tells us that they don't exist, then they shouldn't have any problem with this, would they?
Yeah, exactly. They just like illegals voting and getting health care.
No, it doesn't exist, right? When they just show up on the school board in Iowa making $300,000 a year.
What a job, by the way. What a job.
Nice work if you can get it, I suppose.
So I think we should go to the audience and give you guys a chance to talk to Jack over here. Are there any questions we can go to, or should I keep on going? We got a microphone coming through.
Hey, Jack. So you mentioned a lot of instances of transgender violence. Charlie is the big case, of course. What about transgenderism do you think engenders such violence?
Well, I do think that it's kind of what I was talking about earlier, right? I think the fundamental issue with transgenderism is that denial of reality and that break with reality. And there's kind of that 4chan meme about it, which is a terrible site. I don't know anything about it. I definitely wouldn't recommend anyone go there, where it says, "You will never be a real woman." And that really strikes itself to the heart of the matter. That because these individuals, and some of them obviously have mental issues, and there's no question, but because as a society we decided to enable these mental disorders and give them parades rather than try to get them the help that they need, and in some cases the institutionalization that they need, they're then given hormone injections. Of course, Big Pharma loves that, and they are put on this path where it lowers their inhibitions. It obviously increases cortisol levels, so it creates all sorts of chemical imbalances in the brain, as well as enabling this insane ideation to the point where ultimately they realize that deep down they can never actually achieve the thing that they want. And so what does this breed? It breeds resentment. And
self-loathing turned outward.
The self-loathing, the resentment, the anger. So anger at self, anger at the world, anger at God for creating the world. And then eventually this turns them into angry at anyone who has that which they crave, which is happiness and being a self-actualized individual. And so they will sit there and claim that it's about equality, or that it's about justice, it's about equity, it's about, take your pick of an issue, inclusion, diversity, housing rights, healthcare in the case of Luigi Maggioni. No, it's not that. It's always resentment and then the weaponization of envy as a political system. And transgenderism, unfortunately, because of all these chemical imbalances, because of this direct denial of reality itself, it's why, by the way, at the same token, that violence is not always directed outwards. In fact, much more frequently it's directed inward, where I believe there's a study that says 41% of transgender individuals will attempt suicide at some point.
Yeah, at its core, at its beginning, it's the denial of creation.
Yes.
Denial of who they are. And it's hard to get around that kind of mental illness and that kind of self-loathing and that rejection of God.
Absolutely. And, it just goes to say, like, we used to have horror movies about this, and it used to be very well understood that someone who's on that path is clearly experiencing some kind of break with reality, someone with multiple personality disorder or some form of schizophrenia. There's the movie Psycho is directly about this. The movie Silence of the Lambs is about this. These are some of the biggest movies that Hollywood has ever done. And I don't remember any, but if you put one movie out like that today, they would say, oh, you can't do that because that's anti-trans.
Exactly. You're not allowed to talk about that anymore. Another question? There we go.
Good evening, Jack. Matthew Kipta. I'm the chairman of the D.C. Young Republicans. Good to see you here tonight. We're, I want to say, about a month after Charlie's assassination.
It'll be a month tomorrow.
I think when you have an opportunity like this to go after the left as a national and maybe even international ecosystem, the first 30 to 60 days are very important. The administration has obviously announced some great stuff. They may have done some great stuff. Where do you rate them as we come up on the 30-day mark on what are the great things that have been done and what is undone that you would now turn your influence to push for and that people in this room can, in their own way, push for? Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question. And, look, it's horrible that it would take something as nightmarish as this to really get the ball rolling. And, you could say about anything good that happens, I wish that had happened earlier, right? But in this case, boy, I really do. Wish these declarations had gone out earlier. I'm not saying that it would have stopped it from happening. I don't like to play that game of, what if. It's not good mentally either, by the way. Don't do that. C.S. Lewis talks about that. And the designation is fantastic. The roll-up of many of the cities, the National Guard deployments have been incredible. The activation of the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, because in many of these areas, particularly on the East Coast and the West Coast, where you have very well-developed Antifa networks, there's always somebody sort of, in the back of one of those JTTFs. Do you guys know what JTTFs? Okay, well, I can explain. It's that's where local police and federal law enforcement will work together in a fusion cell. These were really created after, sort of prior to 9/11, but after 9/11 they really exploded because the idea was we can share information in these areas and get away from the stovepiping of intelligence if there is an actual credible terrorist threat to the country. They work in concert with the NCTC, which has an incredible director by the name of Joe Kent, who works, of course, with our incredible DNI, Tulsi Gabbard. Now, there's always a guy somewhere in the back of one of the gang intelligence units at the JTTF. It might be a local cop. It might be someone who just, has an axe to grind with it, or for whatever reason just wants to do the right thing, who has a database of these individuals in their area that are operating in their AOR. We know in the Pacific Northwest, they go between Portland and Seattle. We know that on the East Coast, they travel between New York, Philadelphia, and D.C. Boston is particularly its own cell, but Boston and New York have some comorbidities, if you will, and so I would just ratchet it up. I would say take all of that, ratchet it up, and the foreign terrorist designation, which look. The President of the United States put it down. He said that he wants it to happen. So, for the rest of the White House staff, let's get it done. Let's get that signed and then actually start taking the fight, not just to the individuals in the street, but the individuals who are funding it, the money chains that go back to these corrupt NGOs. Think of it. You don't have to do show of hands, but for those of us who were here on President Trump's first inauguration on January 20th, 2017, there was a massive Antifa violent attack on that inauguration. Remember, we were told that, Jan 6 was not the peaceful transfer of power, but nobody talks about Disrupt J20, which was the Antifa attack on Trump's first inauguration.
I was attacked. It was a wild night.
What happened to you?
I was just chased by a mob, and fortunately I was not the one wearing heels.
Oh my gosh!
My date had to kick off her heels. It was easy to target people.
Was this the night before or the night of?
Inaugural night.
Inaugural night.
Yeah, I got dragged out to the parties, which are always overcrowded and kind of a mess. But if you're wearing a tuxedo,
yep.
They know. Yep. They know which side you're on.
So in the mass arrest and I had infiltrated the Antifa cell prior to then. I was not quite as well known back then or recognizable back then. So I was sitting in a church right here in Northwest DC, and they were going through all their plans. And if you wanted to do direct action, it was over here. It was very well organized. People were bussed in from all over the country.
Back then, you were able to just kind of sneak in.
I literally just walked in.
I don't think that would work anymore.
No, not so much. And but that's, it's almost a decade ago. And all of those people who were mass arrested for attacking President Trump's first inauguration violently. smashing limos, setting them on fire, setting other cars on fire, smashing Starbucks, smashing a McDonald's. They blocked 395, and I was on 395 with my now wife and my brother. He's always been my brother, and he also continues to be my brother, and so they block it. We're like 2 cars back from the roadblock, and I just, of course, jump out and start filming because it's me, and get in their faces. And but I want to explain this. This was the final statement on that. Not only were all of their convictions overturned or the charges overturned, the ACLU then came in and sued the government of D.C., the city of D.C., on behalf of Antifa, and they were awarded, I believe it was $1.7 million for unlawful arrest by the city of D.C. So if you're a D.C. taxpayer, or you were at the time, then your tax money went into the pocket of Antifa, paying them for their attack on President Trump's first inauguration. That is how bad the situation is. And when you ask me, what else can we do? We have so much work to do to tear this out root and stem from the entire system.
I think we probably have time for one more question, if you have time.
I have time?
You've got some stuff to get to.
Oh, yeah, no, I have plenty of time.
Great.
Yeah, I'm good.
Oh, thanks. Hi, Jack. First, we all lost Charlie. I didn't know him personally, but I know for you, you lost your friend, and I'm so sorry for your loss. And thank you for, talking about him as a person and how you really knew him. When he died, when he was murdered, there was that initial shock of like, what this horrible, horrible thing that we saw happen to Charlie. But very, very soon after that, there was the horror of the way the whole country, half the country was talking about him, the horrible things that were like out of nowhere, like this far right, this hate-filled thing. This was not a Charlie that I had ever seen or ever heard. Conversely, I also heard him described as like some podcaster. So somehow there's a message that he's horrible and everyone knows it. And also, he's a no one listens to it. It feels intentional. And do you have any feeling for like, who's creating this message? Like who's in charge of this far left attack on our values? Who's in charge of shaping this narrative or trying to shape a narrative, whether it's about Charlie or about you or about any of us? Like, do you think it's coming from DC? Do you think it's coming from donors or some think tank? Like, it's a really strange thing to me to get my brain around.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an ecosystem, but keep in mind, you're also dealing with, it's certainly an ecosystem of the far left. You've got, Steve Jobs' widow, Lorraine Powell Jobs, who's bankrolling the Atlantic right now and has hired a ton of people from some of the worst places in the entire country. You're talking about like SPLC level, just hate merchants now being hired over at the Atlantic and places like this. And so you can point to those specific outlets and talk about them. But what you're also really dealing with, keep in mind, is cognitive dissonance. And the cognitive dissonance there is that, well, Charlie Kirk must be a fascist because he supports Donald Trump. And I know Donald Trump is a fascist because that's what the TV tells me every night. That's what the Washington Post tells me. That's what CNN tells me. That's what MSNBC tells me. Donald Trump and Donald Trump supporters must be fascists. And because they are fascists, then yes, it's, they sort of know instinctively that they have to say, we don't think that he should have been killed. And then you know what comes next. There's always that, but... And even Barack Obama did that. When Barack Obama was asked about this, he said, we don't condone political violence, but, And he then went into this litany of smears of Charlie Kirk, and just in some cases outright lies, claiming that Charlie had said, quote unquote, black women have substandard brains or something like this, and which is not true at all. He did say Michelle Obama, Ketanji Brown Jackson, but again, he did not say all black women. And so they do this over and over and over again, because for them to have to admit that a good man was killed, that a family man, a Christian man, someone who they disagreed with, but a good man was killed. This would be an entire repudiation of their whole project, because leftist politics is based and rooted in resentment. However, there's also this interesting game they play where they never admit it. They never admit it to themselves, and I'm sure you've seen all the signs or, heard the refrain from some Redditor or some like suburban woman, just be a good effing person, right? And they scream it over and over and over. And in their mind, to be good means to be associated with all the things of the left. And to be, quote unquote, bad is to be associated with all the things of the right. And I could sit here for years and talk about, or hours, I should say, and talk about how many years this has been in the making. I actually track a lot of it back to Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, because he was one of the first people that came up in America who started talking about politics, because he didn't know anything about politics. But he knew about sports, so he started talking about politics as if it was just, sports teams. And so the Democrats were like, the left were like the good ones, and the right were the bad ones. And so we're against those guys. And he also, by the way, is one of the people who shut down one of the last shows that existed in America where both sides would talk to each other, and that was Crossfire, with an appearance that he made when Tucker Carlson, a very young Tucker Carlson, bow tie
Just a
Tucker
baby.
Carlson, baby Tucker, was the host, and he would yell and say, "How dare you? You guys are the problem." But what were they doing that was so problematic? They were sitting down and having a cordial discussion about the issues, and certainly disagreeing, but this was really the last show in America where you would see that. That doesn't exist anymore anywhere on the higher level. And one of the people who may have been trying to bring that back in some way or in a modern form was Charlie, by saying, look, if we disagree, then prove me wrong. Come and if I've said something that you believe is misinformation, then what better way to have that out than having a debate on a college campus, the literal modern public square, and let's have a chat and figure it out. And he would always say, if you disagree, come to the front. And if someone was there, he wouldn't berate them and he wouldn't make fun of them, because I probably would. But
It's hard to have his patience.
It's very hard. He was very patient, and he would say, hey, if he would see someone was nervous, he would say, hey, it's okay. Take your time. Think about what you want to say, guys. No heckling. He would always let them have their say, and he would try to meet the person rather than just argue with them. So to answer your question, where does it come from? It comes from this belief, which is completely widespread on the left, and poll after poll after poll shows this, that they, to a great extent, don't look at us as people. They look at us as some sort of sub-creature. They look at us as cavemen. They look at us as people who are not as progressive
On
and
the wrong side of
elite.
history.
Yeah, we're on the wrong side of history, and we have the same values as those poor inbred hicks in Middle America. Crawling around on their hands and knees and living off of like the bugs or something, which is what they actually think of Middle America, which was a great part. I'm from Pennsylvania, so I mean I know that part of the country, and they're good people, and I've traveled the country, of course, over the last 10 years and met so many of them. And J.D. Vance, by the way, is a living repudiation of everything they say about people from that part of the world, or that part of America. But it's like on the one text message thread, and I joked about the indictment of Letitia James, which I completely support, by the way. And by the way, I'll say this on Letitia James because I know it's going viral, and I think we're live. Political lawfare must be responded to with exact reciprocity, because if it is not, then there is no incentive for them to ever do it again. What do I mean by this? That if you don't respond to the James Comeys and the Letitia James and the Fannie Willises and the John Brennans and the Clappers, and you guys all know the list, if you don't respond in kind, what's to stop them from doing it again? What's to stop them from doing it again to a J.D. Vance or a Marco Rubio or a Pete Hegseth or a Tulsi, whoever, right? Whoever. Nothing will stop them. And so you have to go toe to toe, not with reprisals, not with reactionaryism, but with exact reciprocity to say we are willing to achieve mutually assured destruction. And, Chris, you mentioned earlier about how at some point you have to defend civilization and there must be order for liberty to flourish. And this idea that we have rule of law, when you mess around with the rule of law, when you mess around with the justice system, when you create multiple tiers of justice, this is the exact function that destabilizes a society, that can lead you careening towards civil war. Because if your justice system doesn't work, if your government system doesn't work, if laws are only followed by certain people or only applied to certain people and not others, then eventually people start to think that a government doesn't have legitimacy. And if they think that the government doesn't have legitimacy, there is a tendency to take matters into their own hands.
I've been thinking about Lincoln's speech at the Lyceum, which we studied
Yes,
together as fellows.
that's right.
And how it applies today.
Bleeding Kansas.
Yeah.
Bleeding Kansas is it's been on my mind a lot lately. I'll just say it's been on my mind a lot, and I don't want this country has gone to that place before, and I hope to God that we don't go anywhere close to that ever again. But you can see a lot of parallels.
To leave folks with something to look forward to and to tune into, you're actively involved in the work to continue Charlie's legacy and to continue his work. The Charlie Kirk Show, you're frequently there. You, the great Andrew Colvett, the wonderful Blake Neff. What can people look to for the future of that show and the voice, and what's going to be coming out of Turning Point in these coming weeks, months, and years, and the leadership that it's going to provide, and where you guys intend to, where you see yourselves in a tragically post-Charlie world moving forward?
Yeah, no. Well, as a matter of fact, since it is a Thursday night, it is Thought Crime Thursday, and I'm actually going to be hosting Thought Crime on the Charlie Kirk Show in just about an hour here, and graciously CPI has allowed me to do that from their studio, great studio across the street here, and the mission continues. The thought crimes will continue. And we will continue to break taboos. We will continue to fight that fight in terms of the show. As far as the organization, it's been so incredible and horrifying at the same time to have Erica, who's someone who I've always been friends with Erica. I've always considered her a friend. She and my wife are very close, and her guidance through this, her steadfastness, her sorrow, which she's shown, and certainly being there in the office. And she comes into the office. She comes into the office and works. And obviously, there's lots of decisions that need to be made and decision points. But the big decision, the question, do you continue? Not a single one of us had a doubt about that, because we know what Charlie would have wanted in terms of that. Keep going. Keep the mission alive. Keep fighting. And so that's why I'm here tonight. That's why I'm glad you guys all came out tonight, even knowing that these are the odds we're up against. That's why tomorrow night I'll be going with a number of other people from Turning Point, Benny Johnson, and some of our frequent collaborators like Cliff Maloney and Scott Presser. We're going to get involved in the New Jersey governor's race. We're going to be up there in Wildwood, New Jersey.
It's about time someone paid attention in New Jersey, because people always forget, and it's always much closer.
I feel like Scott. I got to give credit to Scott Presser on this, because it's such a good line. He said Pennsylvania is the new Ohio, and New Jersey is the new Pennsylvania. And if you look at the voting patterns of this, every single county in New Jersey in the 2024 election shifted right. And Jack Ciattarelli, who's a fantastic candidate, up against Mickey Shirley, who's just a horrible candidate, just an absolute disgraceful candidate, lied about her Naval Academy situation and won't release her records and all the insider training from Congress. He's got a real chance. He's within striking distance, so we're going to get involved there. The mission continues on campus, where the numbers, they send me new numbers every week, and I can't even keep track of them. It's a lot. We've had a lot of new chapters and new signups, hundreds of thousands. I think the number I do remember that I saw this morning, the quote-unquote official number they gave us, we are now, Turning Point USA, high school, college chapter, we are now at 800,000 student members. 800,000. Which is just unbelievable. I can't even comprehend that many students having signed up to some form of Turning Point. And that doesn't even include what we do on Turning Point Action on the C4 side, or Turning Point Faith, which is done in the faith community. And so that continues. I mentioned the president yesterday. We had 6,000 people when we went back to Utah, because we are not canceling the tour. We are continuing the tour. So we had 6,200 people. We went back to Utah. 4,000, actually about 4,500 in Montana. 4,000 people in Montana. I didn't even know there were 4,000. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm an East Coast guy. I'll get it out of me. No, but we had 4,000 people in Montana. The tour is absolutely continuing, and we're getting all of Charlie's friends to get involved, and perhaps even a certain bearded member of the current White House will be part of that tour. We'll see if something like that happens. And actually earlier today, so the campus organizing continues, the politicking continues, and earlier today we announced that the culture war will continue. And if you guys hadn't seen this, the media's losing their minds over it before they were losing their minds about the Letitia James indictment, that we announced we are going to be holding a competing halftime show to Bad Bunny. We are holding a all-American halftime show, which I can and I'm proud to report will be held 100% in English. So Bad Bunny, you have 4 months to learn English, not the other way around. And it's like, it's funny because people always say, it's like, well, Charlie always loved this and Charlie always loved that. Yeah, well, Charlie always hated the Super Bowl halftime shows.
It's gone downhill since Creed.
Yeah, exactly. And well, no, Creed was never a Super Bowl halftime show.
Oh, is it just a Dallas
Creed
Cowboys?
was a Dallas Cowboys Thanksgiving show, and so
misinformation.
I know, and so just we got to keep it accurate around here. And I know I tweeted out a couple of weeks ago, would it be a shame if Turning Point held a halftime show with Creed? No announcements. I can't make any announcements right now. All I can say is there are conversations.
We've been guessing on the lineup all day, and I can't wait to see it.
There are conversations. But yeah, and we have a poll up. So if you can go to, what is the site? AmericanHalftimeShow.com, and you can vote on different genres of music. There's country, there's classic rock, yes, rap, if you're into that. That's there. And then the number one bullet, though, is anything in English, which is phenomenal. Because, no, by the way, the Super Bowl halftime show, the left understands cultural dominance. And in the wake of George Floyd and the BLM moment, the NFL, in a very cowardly move, signed an exclusivity deal. And people don't realize this. They signed an exclusivity deal with who? Rock Nation. What is Rock Nation? This is the record management and production company that is controlled by Jay-Z and Beyonce. So Jay-Z and Beyonce, the best friends of Barack and Michelle Obama, they have exclusive control over who gets to perform at the Super Bowl halftime show. And I believe that contract, it goes, I think, till 2026, possibly even 2029. The left ran the table on us culturally while the right was asleep at the wheel. And I could sit here and I could complain about it, or I could whine about it. But you know what? Look, we've got Turning Point. We're going to put on our own show, and we are going to fight them tooth and nail. We're going to fight fire with fire, and we are going to put on the best. I can't say legally. I can't say the other event that's going on, but we are going to be putting on the best American halftime show that's ever been seen.
I can't wait. Jack, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Chris, always a pleasure, my friend.